power, strategy, seduction, success. In this video, I interview Robert Greene. Robert Greene is one of the most successful nonfiction authors of our era. If you exclude books about politics, I'm not exaggerating. He sold millions and millions and millions and millions of copies of his books. His most famous book is called The 48 Laws of Power. And that book was so inspiring to the musician 50 Cent that 50 Cent wanted to co-author a book about power, success, and achievement as well with him. So he sold millions of copies from all over the world for many books on power, seduction, strategy, success, achievement. His name is Robert Greene. And in this interview, we talk all about his journey, how he was able to create this amazing, successful life, the exact life that he envisioned for himself and far grander and far beyond that. And we talk about neuroplasticity, how to take control of your mind in an environment of instability that we have in our world right now. So make sure you hit the like button right over there on this side and right over there on this side. That'll send this out into the YouTube universe so more people see it. I think it's a really important message for right now in our world. You're going to truly love this interview. So leave a comment down below, hit the like button, and without further ado, here's one of the most successful nonfiction authors in the world, Robert Greene, explaining his concepts of power, success, and achievement and how you can use them right now in your life. All right, today we have Robert Greene, and he's someone that has sold many millions of books and largely on the subject around power. And it's great to have you. Thanks for coming on and talking with us, Robert.
Thanks for having me, Jake. My pleasure.
So you're known for really these books around laws of power, and they've many millions of copies have been sold. And I know that's a lot because having 3 books myself, to get in the millions, there's a lot. You've become one of the, basically, I think of you even more than an author. You're really a researcher into this type of, into these types of ideas. And when you look around at our world right now, there's a lot of people losing their jobs, a lot of people losing their personal power, a lot of people losing any type of power or control over their future right now. There's a lot of relationship problems. There's a lot of problems. What do you think, out of all the laws of power that you studied right now, what do you think is most important to bring back to the surface and conversation? What do you think is most essential right now out of all of your laws of power, out of all of your research? What do you think is the most important conversation you've wrote about in the past that's now important again?
Well, the main thing is, and I just taped a podcast yesterday for my own YouTube channel that's going to sort of go into this, but the main problem is that, we're creatures of habit, and neurologically, if things keep repeating over and over the course of hours and days, they get kind of written literally into our brains, to the neural connections. And so what we're going through now is a period of great anxiety and fear, where we're kind of contracting inward. We have to spend more time by ourselves. We have to think more about what's going on in the world. We can't be as active. And my fear is that these are laying down patterns and habits that are going to affect us deeply in a year from now when we emerge from this crisis that we're going through. And so what I talk about in a lot of my books is the power, the ability to raise your brain above the moment and think of longer term. I have a law of power about that called Plan All the Way to the End. I talk in my Ward strategy book about the power of that and all the great strategists who are able to do that. And I talked a lot about that in my book on mastery. And I have a whole chapter on it in my last book, The Laws of Human Nature, about our short-sightedness, about how what we see right in front of us has much more powerful impact on what we're thinking. We're creatures of emotion. And what you need to be able to do now in this period is to literally raise your brain up above the moment and think longer term. And imagine this, go through this process. In 1 year, hopefully, they will have a vaccine and we will be past this point as best we can. And we're going to enter into a new landscape, a new business landscape, in which what we thought existed before will be devastated. It'll be gone. It's like a tornado that just passed through. Certain businesses will be literally gone, particularly maybe in the travel industry, and entertainment is going through major shifts. But all areas of business and livelihoods and careers, even writing for myself, are going through these major seismic shifts. It's not going to be the same. And it's going to be a new landscape where you want to have a relatively fearless attitude about the world. There are going to be incredible opportunities out there for new things to start, for new kinds of businesses, because there'll be space cleared for young people, for instance, to start their own business that nobody's ever thought of before, because all these other industries are gone, and there'll be places people are going to want to invest their money in new kinds of enterprises. So there'll be incredible opportunity, but your mindset in these weeks, months of the lockdown, et cetera, are going to infect you. They're going to cause you to contract inwardly. They're going to cause you to be afraid. They're going to cause you to wonder about yourself. They're going to maybe cause you to try and reach for some kind of career or job that's safe and easy, that pays you a lot of money in the near time, for the immediate period, which is understandable. You have to pay your bills, etc. But you have to be able to think longer term about your career, about your future. You want to lay down the foundation of something that will last longer, right? And so you need right now to be thinking about this. You need to be trying to counteract these fearful, anxious habits that are coming, that are being laid down right now. And I explain in my book, last book, Laws of Human Nature, how you have to develop the habit of questioning your own emotions. So if you're feeling afraid and anxious and worried about what's going on in the world, sit back and ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? Is it something real? Is it something concrete? Or is it this overall dread or an anxiety where I'm exaggerating? It's going to be what circumstances are. So confront your own fear, confront your own anxiety, and raise your head above the immediate present and look longer term as to where you want your career to be headed. What are these opportunities that'll be out there in a year? So you're not one of these people, because I know, for instance, my parents, I'm older than you, obviously, I'm twice your age. My parents grew up during the Depression, and I saw it. They never got over it. Their whole lives, they were always, even though my father was, middle class, he had a comfortable life, he was always worried about every penny. That kind of depression mentality stayed with him his entire life. And if you're not careful, that you're going to be stamped by this current recession, depression that we're going through. And you're going to have habits that are going to restrict you a year from now when a whole new world opens up.
Man, that was a lot of amazing things there. So I'd love to circle back to some of the other ways that you perhaps saw your parents and the way that they were impressioned by their times, how that carried into your household as their behaviors and subconscious patterns that might get passed down to others. But first, on our channel, we talk a lot about in neuroscience, as you were discussing, Hebb's law, right? And this is this idea that you, as you said, these emotions fire and wire, and we build these neural networks that are equal to our environment. So how do we, you're saying we need to break out of that, and there's so many people that are stuck, as you said, in this moment right now because there's an overwhelming amount of emotion. How do we detach to be able to question it, to give us the mental space to go into the future, as you're saying? Like, I think that was so amazing and important, and I'd love for you to discuss that in a little bit more detail.
Well, it's not actually that difficult, because you're at home now, you're alone. You have the time and the mental space that you may not have if you were working every day at a job in a physical location where you have all these pressures that are on you. Now you have the space because you're forced to, for most of people. I mean, I'm excluding people who are essential workers, but for people who are now working at home or not in an office, this is precisely the moment that you have the time to create that kind of mental distance, that space. So how do you use your time? I did this a lot with Ryan Holiday. I talked to him about dead time versus alive time. Dead time during this period is playing video games, binge watching TV shows, internet porn. I mean, whatever it is, these are the things that you're doing to distract yourself because you're bored and you're anxious and you need distractions. that's dead time. That's time that doesn't create any value for you moving forward. It doesn't enrich your brain. It doesn't enrich your ideas. It doesn't lay down any skills for the future. You want to exploit this time. Okay, so now that you're alone and you have time, you can work on yourself. And it's not that complicated. So most of the time, we human beings are very reactive animals. We can't help it. I know I'm the same. I don't exclude myself from that. So if somebody says something that's kind of in my face that makes me angry, that feels like a diss or something like that, I get all emotional and upset. I take it personally. And then I react in a way that maybe isn't very good for me. It's detrimental in the long run. Okay. So right now you're experiencing all sorts of emotions: fear, anger, maybe hatred, maybe excitement. I don't know what they are, a full range of things. And you need on a daily basis to take, first you have to begin with baby steps. You can't suddenly transform yourself into a Zen master who has that inner space that can look at yourself with distance. It requires little movements every day. It's sort of like when you exercise to get yourself in shape, you're aware that you must do little things and slowly your muscles will build and you'll be laying down patterns of behavior that in a month you'll be a lot stronger. So you begin by first looking at yourself and questioning your own emotions. And I talked about that earlier, but it's really not that complicated. So in the course of tomorrow, let's say you begin tomorrow, look at yourself and try and pay attention, and particularly pay attention to any moment where you're feeling a little bit more emotional than usual. Maybe you're depressed, or maybe something has excited you, or maybe you're afraid. All right. Step back and ask yourself, why am I experiencing this emotion? Is there something real and concrete? Am I depressed because something actually happened? Or is it, I don't really know why I'm depressed? Maybe something happened a week ago, or maybe there's something unconscious going on with me. I don't understand it. Why am I angry? Is it because that person didn't respond to my emails? Or is it because I have this problem where I need people to respond to me right away? And if they don't, I take it personally, right? Which is very common, very human. So question yourself, and you have to begin slowly. You can't do that the whole day because it'll be irritating. You have to be able to want to go through this process. You have to see the power in it. You have to see the fact. So, for instance, I meditate every morning, right? I go through that 40 minutes every morning, and I've noticed that in that kind of time, I'm definitely going inward and I'm calming myself down. In the course of a day, I don't react so much to what people say or do. I'm able to step back and go, oh, they didn't mean that personally, or it's not worth getting upset about. You need to have that kind of power, but it comes from beginning to question yourself, from creating some inner space where you allow yourself to think about your emotions instead of reacting to them. So, why am I afraid this morning? Am I afraid literally because something happened? Or is it because of something I read on social media? Or is it something I read in the newspaper or saw in the news or wherever? So this is a process that if you begin slowly, you begin to see the power in it. You begin to see, I don't need to react so much. And if you don't react so much, you don't have all this inner drama and all this emotions churning inward. And that gives you space for more thinking. The more space you create, the more space you'll be able to create going forward. Just start a little bit and it'll slowly grow and grow and grow because you won't be dragged down by all the bullshit and crap that people throw at you every day. So that's sort of how I would begin the process.
Amazing. I feel like I got more inner space just listening to it. So you used a word that I think can't be overstated enough, and that's inner drama. And what do you think one or the most common inner dramas that we collectively have that you think stop us from achieving these levels of power that you discuss and optimizing our highest levels of our own human nature, of our own human potential? What are some of these most, whether it's 1, 2, 3, what are a couple that you think are the most common inner dramas playing out on the soap opera of our world right now? And what can we do about them?
Well, the to look at the macro picture of here, the source of all the inner drama is that you tend to take everything people say and do personally. If you can eliminate that one habit, you can get rid of all the other little bits of drama that come up from all different kinds of sources. And I'll go into one in a minute. But that's the main step you have to do. And I repeat this over and over again in all of my books. And I really hit you over the head with it in my last book, The Laws of Human Nature, that people, what they say or do, they're not thinking so much about you, you know, that you think that everything we're all narcissists. You think that everything people say or do or hint at is because they're thinking about you and they're reacting to you personally. But 95% of the time, it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with something their spouse or someone in their family said, something that their baggage that they're carrying from their childhood, or for something that a boss did. It's not personal, right? Sometimes it is. Sometimes something you did is actually really the source of the drama or the friction. Okay, maybe in those cases, but more times, often than not, it has nothing to do with you, right? And the best thing you can do is, even if it is have something to do with you, to think that it doesn't, to go through a process where, all right, he isn't responding to my emails. Well, that means because he or she is probably going through things right now and they're very busy, and maybe I'm not on their radar. It's not about me or my ideas. It's just about the fact that we're all overworked right now, and people, we have to give them a little bit of credit. We have to be a little more indulgent about people. Just go through a process where mentally you reduce the personal element, and that will get rid of so much of your inner drama. You'll be shocked at how free your brain will be if you do that. Another source of inner drama is the words that other people tell you about yourself. I talk a lot about this in my book, Mastery, which is basically a book about how to maximize your individual spirit, how to find the right career path, how to go through an apprenticeship to develop your skills, and how to become creative and then a master in your field. And the problem for most people is they're never able to find that path in life that is their path. Like you described to me your path. You know, you quit college, you went on a journey, you went to Thailand, you then decided to write books, you then created your powerful podcast audience, etc. That was your journey. That was meant for you alone. But most people, they're hearing this voice in their head from their parents, from their teachers, from their friends, from their colleagues, from social media, that's saying, you can't do that. This is who you are. They're trying to define you and trying to define your limitations. They're trying to infiltrate their tastes, their values into your world, which has nothing to do with what makes you interesting or special. And I try and make the point that your source of power lies in is finding what makes you different from everybody else and hitting on that, using it as much as you can, hitting it, what makes you special and different. So for me, it's been books, but it's been the kind of strange books that I write. They're strange. They're different. I've created my own niche. You have that power yourself, but you're listening to other people tell you who you are. You're listening to other people fill you with fear about your career path, about, oh, you start your own business, it'll probably fail. And what will happen if it fails? You won't have any money. Your parents say, you got to go to law school. If you don't go to law school, you'll be nowhere in 10 years. You got to shut all that crap out. You got to stop listening to people. They're creating too much of that inner drama. They're creating doubts and fears and anxieties that don't need to be there. That would be probably one of the main sources of the inner drama that we're talking about. That's sort of a few ideas right there.
That's fascinating. And it's right. It's true. So let me ask you, one of the questions that I had pre-thought out that I wanted to ask was about you becoming successful as an author, because for viewers listening to this, I read a stat when I was 20, which was right when I was finishing my first book, and everyone, thought it was the worst idea. All the publishers said no. And I thought times I was going to get published and everyone said no. And I remember somebody in my family, telling me, you should go back to school and this is a bad idea. And it was an article that said that 95% of books or authors don't sell 2,500 copies in a lifetime. And I'm not positive if that's 100% accurate, but I mean, for someone that isn't aware, do the math on 2,500 copies over a lifetime, call it 10 years. You're talking about like 20 grand, 30 grand over a 10-year period, right? And you've actually become like probably one of the, if you're talking about nonfiction, especially nonfiction that's outside of politics, you've become one of the highest grossers in publishing industry. And that's like, it's very, very rare that happens, that someone, I've made most of my money by using the internet, seminars. Like I've sold decent in books, I probably sold over 100,000 between all three combined, but you sold millions. Like what made you become like so successful and such a lucrative career? Because you meet millions of people that are like, Robert, I'm going to be just like you. And like almost statistically, you probably have a higher probability of like winning a local lottery than you do, having the level of success that you've had with books. Like how did that happen? And that's amazing, first of all, too. So congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you have to understand there's always an element of luck involved. And I tell people this all the time. It's good to at least recognize the element of luck, because it prevents you from getting a big head, from getting a huge ego, from becoming grandiose, which is something I talked about in my last book, which is a very big tendency for people who have success. So I recognize the element of luck in my life. I was 35 years old, more or less. I had been trying all different kinds of careers. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I tried working in journalism. That didn't work out. I went and I vagabonded like you did all through Europe for 5 years, trying to write novels, teaching English, working in construction jobs, working at hotels, etc. That didn't work out. I came back to Los Angeles, where I'm from, and I started to work in the film business, thinking I'd write screenplays, and that didn't work. And I was getting very despondent and very worried about myself, and my parents were getting very worried. And then I was 35, 36 years old, and here's the element of luck. I meet a man. I'm in Italy for a job. He's a packager of books, and he asks me if I have an idea for a book. And I improvise. It just sort of spills out of me like some demon that just came vomiting out of my chest. The idea for the 48 Laws, what turned into the 48 Laws of Power. He was so excited. He said, he was Dutch, and I won't imitate his voice. He said, Robert, I will pay you to live while you write this book. Wow, this was fantastic. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. But the lesson here is several. First of all, I'd spent all these years, those wandering years, developing real skill. I wasn't wasting my time. In journalism, I knew how to write under a deadline. I knew how to write concisely, how to appeal to an audience, etc. Writing novels, I sort of trained myself to be self-disciplined. I had no boss, and I taught myself how to make my writing entertaining and how to tell stories. And then in Hollywood, that was even more accentuated. And I also developed real researching skills in my work in Hollywood, et cetera, because I worked also as a researcher. So I was able to bring all of this together. And the point is, something like this will happen to you in your life. I'm talking to the people out there, where luck will intervene. You'll meet someone who will cross your path with an idea or an opportunity. Are you in a position to exploit it? Are you even in a position to recognize that it is an opportunity? And I can honestly tell you that if this person, I had met him 10 years earlier, it wouldn't have worked out, because I was too young, I was too impatient, I was too full of myself, and I didn't have the right skills. But it came at the right moment, and I was desperate, and I saw this was my opportunity, and I seized it. I sucked every little drop of blood I could out of that guy to get that book published, right? So that moment will happen to you. Are you ready for it? Do you recognize it? Are you fearless enough to take it? And so the other thing was, I knew that this was my one chance to break out of the rut I had been in, to do something that would, set me up for life. but I wasn't afraid. And so I made a book that was, as if you know the 48 Laws of Power. It's very unusual. It's very strange. It has a structure that you've never seen before. I tell a story. I then interpret the story. I then go into sort of the ideas behind it. I have images. I have kind of quotes all in different formats. I have stories on the margins. You've never seen a book like that. And the publishers were a little worried about it, and they were trying to edge me into making something a little more normal. And me and the packager who set me up, Joost Elfers, we told him, no, you either accept this weird book or we're walking somewhere else. That's an element of fearlessness that you have to have. If you have an idea and you think it's great and you've kind of tested it and you feel confident about it, you got to not listen to all the people out there who are going to fill you with their dumb ideas, who are going to try and water down what makes you different. So recognizing the luck, seizing the hell out of it, making sure it was something that would set me up for life, and not being afraid to be different from all the other books out there. I think that's sort of the source of my success. And the final thing I'll say is, when I write a book, I begin from the premise of, this book will probably fail. I don't get high on myself. I go, I want to understand the reality of the subject I'm dealing with, whether it's strategy in war or seduction or power or 50 Cent, who I wrote a book with, or mastery or human nature. This book probably will suck. People won't like it. I will sell 200 copies of it. I better get my game together. I better research so deeply and understand so profoundly what I'm studying that I will avoid that horrifying fate of having hardly anybody interested in my books. And with that motivation, I make sure my books are extremely well researched, so I'm hitting upon the truth and reality so that my readers can read it, and not just read it and be entertained, but read it and have their lives changed, have their brains changed by what I'm saying. So recognizing luck and seizing it, not being afraid to be different, and being painstaking and disciplined, and making sure that I'm detail oriented and that I'm thinking deeply about my audience. I think those are the keys to what's happened to me, more or less.
First of all, that's an amazing story. That is such a good story.
Mm.
Yeah. So let me ask you, there's so many things that I want to say out of that. Just a quick couple word answer. First year, how did the first year of publication of that book go? How many copies did you sell the first year? Literally 12 months it was out.
It came out in September or October of 98. I don't know off the top of my head. It wasn't earth-shattering. It was maybe 100,000. Now we're approaching 3 million in the United States alone. So it actually sells more now than it sold in the first year, if you can believe it.
That's amazing.
Because it's become like a cult type thing. Around the world, it's sold many more copies than that, but just in the US alone. So, it started slowly and it built. Word of mouth is how my books basically sell themselves.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, for anyone listening that isn't super familiar with Robert, I wasn't overstating when I said that, he's become one of the most successful nonfiction authors of our era that isn't writing, if you exclude political books especially. So that's incredible. So you your third point was about discipline and those types of things. And one of the things that I think is most common is people really don't understand the process of someone who became, as like you said, like it's really not an overstatement. You actually wrote like a cult following book that is read all over the world, whether it's in libraries or CEO executive suites or prisons. It became popular in jail. 50 Cent loved it so much he wanted to write a book. Like, it's a wild thing. And it almost seems like this really weird overnight hysterical success that is unrelatable to. But you were saying I think you were somewhere around 40 years old and you still hadn't really accomplished anything. Your parents were worried about you as a 40-year-old. And you said discipline, and I know from Ryan too how painstakingly detail oriented you are. But let's talk a little bit about like that idea of process over outcome. It's like I'm sure you see a lot of people's problem, especially young people, is they're overly ambitious about what they can accomplish, and then it doesn't happen as quickly as they want, and they don't have the discipline. What were the things that made you disciplined? How does that show up in your life? And what's your advice on that subject?
Well, it's probably what separates people who are successful from those who aren't successful. Because honestly, everybody in the world has ideas. You know, you wake up in the morning, you're in the shower, you think, God, I have a great idea for a screenplay for a business. Everybody has that goes through that process. But the difference are the people who actually execute those ideas. And to execute your ideas, you need a degree of self-confidence. You need to believe that you can pull it off, which isn't easy and a lot of people lack. And then you have to have developed very definite habits, disciplined habits. And so I talk a lot about that in my book, Mastery. The key period in your life was when you were young, when you went to school, and when you were in junior high or high school, not talking about college, where you learned the value. Maybe you hated learning math, maybe it wasn't your subject or whatever, but you learned the value of, if I spend a month trying to do something that's tedious, it pays off in the end. I get a reward. The reward is I feel like I'm not so stupid. I feel like I can do this. You know, it builds confidence. And it doesn't have to be, it could be in sports, it could be in exercising. You're a swimmer, and you'd find out that if you keep doing it enough, you'll develop power and speed, and you can actually become a competitive swimmer. It can be in the arts, it can be in any field, working with your hands. But you need to have developed that thought that there is a reward for being disciplined. And if you lack that when you're 20 or 21, it's difficult. It's not impossible, but you have to find a way to develop it. And you have to spend, I consider your 20s to be what I call your apprenticeship phase. That's your period where you're learning the skills that are going to let you mount that stairway up to being creative and being a master. And so those skills are things that you repeat over and over and over again, right? So you want to get a job or a career that will allow you those kinds of reps, because it's all about repetition, right? So for me personally, when I was very young, I loved school and I studied very hard. And I developed the idea that working hard gives me rewards, and those rewards are important. And then, you know, working in the different fields that I told you about, I had to be disciplined. You don't know what it's like to write under a deadline where by tomorrow you have to have written 1,000-word essay for a newspaper or a magazine. Well, that's going to make you concentrate and be able to do it, you know. So the other thing is to have some self-initiative. You can't always have people breathing down your neck. You have to be able to do things on your own. So let's say you are 22 and you never really got that reward that I'm talking about when you were younger. All right. Well, you need to be able to develop it on your own. How do you do that? Well, start trying. Maybe you have a job. Start trying to learn a foreign language. Start trying to play a musical instrument. Take up a new form of exercise that you haven't done. Something where there is a learning curve, right? And go through the process. And you're going to start feeling impatient. God damn it, I'm sick. I hate running. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm just going to go on the treadmill or whatever, etc. No, you force yourself to do it. You force yourself to get that reward, or the musical instrument, or the foreign language, or whatever it is. You know, if you're a writer, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every single day. You have to develop the habit, and you have to not worry about if it's brilliant or not. These are things that will help develop that pattern in your brain, that repeating something over and over and over again, you get better at it. And I talked about this in Mastery a lot. The neuroscience demonstrates it. We are blessed with brains that are incredibly plastic. You can literally recreate your brain through the habits that you develop. You're developing all kinds of new neural connections that weren't there before. So if it's like an environment where there's like the desert, where there's very little life, not much going on, and that's kind of a brain of somebody who's lazy, who doesn't do anything. But you can suddenly make that environment more like a jungle, more like the Amazon, full of all kinds of weird plants and tropical things. You can literally create the environment of your brain by these habits that you develop, by learning skills, by learning discipline, by setting down a foundation that you will be able to build on over and over again, by reading books, by absorbing knowledge. And the thing is, now with the lockdown, but in general with the internet, you have this insane possibility to learn anything you want. There are people on YouTube teaching you the silliest little thing that you ever would want to learn before, right? You have incredible potential and power to learn things on your computer that you never had 20, 30 years ago. You got to exploit that. You've got to use this. So even if you have a crap job and you want to break out of it, and you want to be able to maybe go become a writer or have your own business, you've got to first develop the calmness, the energy, the patience, the ability to deal with tediousness, and the ability to deal with criticism and failure by going slow. We live in a world where everything is fast and everything is easy. And the problem with a lot of young people, and I'm not criticizing because I'm guilty of it myself, with the phone in your hand. You get used to everything being so fast and being so simple that you think, well, anything in life can be like that. You don't really think that, but unconsciously you do. You think, wow, I should be able to just have an idea and sell it and millions of dollars will come in, right? You have to slow yourself down. You have to be able to deal with tediousness, with difficulty, with failure, with criticism. Life is not easy. And you'd have to be able to also develop a bit of a tough skin about these things. But if you're in your 20s, this is the time that you are either going to make this happen or it's never going to happen. Because literally, if you're in your 30s and you never develop that discipline, I'm sorry, but I truly think it's almost too late.
That's fascinating. So we just had our first baby. She's, I think, 16 days old today. And
congratulations.
Thanks.
You don't look like you just had a baby. You don't look so tired.
We've got the best baby in the world. She's hardly ever cries. One point she went like 2 days crying last week. She's a really good baby, and I have a really calm, amazing wife. So that energy, has transmitted for sure. She's been my mother-in-law is here, and she has 3 children, like 7 granddaughters, and she said, and she helped raise all of them, and she said she'd never seen one so calm. So I think that's
really great.
I give my wife the credit for that because she was in my wife's body. My wife's got like the most calm, amazing. My wife's a very
you seem pretty calm, pretty zen yourself. So maybe it's the two of you.
I give her the credit for that one.
Okay, all right.
Just joking a little bit, but so it's been amazing. It's been amazing so far. But the reason I bring that up is because I think about my baby, and I think about the world that we have today. You just talked about people's. I hate the word to say it, is brainwashed. People are brainwashed. They have no self-control. The classrooms are too full. All the kids are now, 7, 8, 9 years old. They're already addicted to their cell phones. These are the types of friends that they're growing up with. The teachers don't care. It's not a good environment. And it's getting worse because there's so much deliberate brainwashing, and they know so much about psychology now that they're really manipulating young people's minds. And it's bad. It's not good. It's even worse than when I was a kid, and I'm only 29. And it's really different than when you were a kid. And I think about it, I'm like, I don't even know if I could put my kid in a school. And I'm thinking about homeschool, and then I think about what do I want to teach them, and what do I want to do the best I can as a dad to help them learn and all these types of things. Obviously, I view the world in a different way. I'm 29. I dropped out. I built my own, successful business and all these things. But I think about this question: what would you do knowing everything you know right now, if you just had a 2-week-old baby or it's 10 years old and you think about the education you want to part at it, I guess the age doesn't really matter, whether they're 2 weeks now or they're 10 years old now or 14 years old. What are the most important things you would teach them? How would you teach them? Would you have them go to normal schools? What are the, is an apprenticeship more important? Like, what would you do right now? Like, I ask you because I'm so fascinated by how intelligent you are. And then I think about my own daughter. So it's my own selfish question, but I think everybody's asking this question right now.
What's her name, by the way?
Jada, Jada.
Very nice. Like Jada Pinkett.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's Jada Clark Ducey. Jada Clark Ducey.
Very nice. Very nice name.
Thanks.
Well, the thing is, so it also depends on where you live and the schools that are available to you. There are alternative forms of education, like Montessori, for instance,
right,
where they approach it differently. But the main problem with schools is they crush your individual spirit. They try and put you into cookie cutter molds, and they sort of enforce you in this idea that learning is kind of painful and you hate it. And you get turned off from learning because you don't want to learn anything because you were forced to learn algebra, you were forced to learn this. And then your whole life, you look at books as something, oh my God, I don't want to go anywhere near that. Okay. So that's the main danger that education has. So when you want to look at your child, and I talked a lot about this, and as I said in my book, Mastery, is your child has its own unique spirit. It has its own a DNA that no other child of that age will ever have. It's sort of an amazing fact that each person has a DNA that it will never be replicated. It's yours and yours alone. She has a spirit that makes her different from all the other kids in the world right now that are coming up. All right. Are you going to let that flourish? Are you going to encourage it? Or are you going to impose your own values and your own ideas? So let's say as she gets older, you have your own particular biases. Let's say she wants to be a teacher, or she loves learning, or she loves books and reading. And I'm not saying about you personally, but now I want her to be an artist. I want her to be a dancer or something, whatever it is. You are unconsciously influencing that person, that very unique, special person, just by thinking it. You never say it, but she can pick up your disappointment when she says, oh, I really want to be this or that. You are unconsciously influencing it. You want to drop all of your biases. You want to be able to nourish what makes her different. And if she doesn't want to go learn how to do this particular thing, but she prefers dancing as opposed to, I don't know, whatever, learning a musical instrument, then let her do it. Because children have these, what I call primal inclinations. They're drawn to something that it makes them different. And I explain in my book examples of Steve Jobs walking in front when he was 6 years old. He sees a shop window full of electronic gadgets. And he goes, my God, those are so amazing. And it's sort of that obsession that happened when he was 6, where he's interested in the design element of technology, stayed with him the rest of your life. So your child will have those moments as well. And it's not that you don't want them to do anything. They have to choose something, but you want to be able to create that reward situation that I'm talking about when they're 4 or 5 or 6 years old. So they want to learn something. They're excited. They want to learn, I don't know, something with books, or they want to learn a physical activity, or they want to learn music, etc. Let them do it. Encourage it, make them go through that process, but make it something that their willpower and their emotions are engaged. You're not forcing them. You're not imposing your own values on them, and let them discover on their own whether they really truly have a love for this thing or not. Because you don't learn anything deeply. You never become good at something unless you're emotionally engaged, unless you're in love with it. That's another element of neuroscience, and I discuss a lot about that in my book. You don't learn something unless you want to learn it, because you're not paying attention. And the example I give is, I study a lot of foreign languages. It's something that always interested me. And I studied French in college, and then I went to France, and I could barely speak. People were blathering all around me, and I couldn't understand anything they said. God damn it! I spent 2, 3 years and I didn't learn a thing. And then I met a French girl, and I really wanted to date her, and I got very excited about it. And I started dating her, and in 2 weeks, I learned more French than I learned in 3 years of college because I was motivated, because I wanted to, because I had to, right? So when you feel the necessity and you feel the desire, you will learn things, you will move mountains. So you want to create that in your child, get in, kind of nourish that thing that they love, and get them to go through the process so they discover on their own the rewards that come from repeating something, from doing it over and over again, from being disciplined. All right. Then if it comes to schooling, at least now they have a ground where they maybe won't be so biased by what other people are saying. You know, I don't know about homeschooling. It depends on who you are and the time that you have, and if you can find a school where they have an alternate approach. But the main thing that you have to be worried about is that they're going to inculcate your child with this idea that they have to be this and they can't be that. They need to study this, and you're going to turn them off from learning. So early on, before they get sucked into that brainwashing machine, as you say, you have to develop the habit, the idea in their head that learning is fun, that getting better at something is exciting, that it's really good for you, and that it's great. And so when they're in school, maybe they're hearing that thing, then they come home and they practice the piano, or they practice basketball, or whatever it is. They know that they can tune out all the other bullshit that people are giving them. They can develop some inner sense of who they are and what makes them different and what they truly love. So they can tune out all the other stuff that people are throwing at them. So that's sort of, to me, the key element, the key component is, does the child feel consciously and unconsciously from their parents that they have the room to nourish and develop something that they really are attracted to? Or do they feel that you're kind of pushing them away from that and trying to channel them into something that may be more lucrative, maybe more of what you like? So I think that's sort of the key element right there.
That's really fascinating. So do you think the biggest mistake then, or one of them that we make as a society, is that we don't, well, first of all, so what you're saying is it's not even what the kid's doing, it's that they learn that pattern of the risk reward mechanism and sticking
Right.
to in this habit that's built in their brain that they can accomplish.
Right.
That's what you're saying. It's not what they do.
Right.
It could change over the course of life.
Sure, of course.
Learn that skill. So that's interesting, because I learned that in basketball when I was a kid. That's what I learned.
Yeah.
And that's what made me drop out and say, if I could put the same idea in the same principled approach to basketball, if I could do this, even though I can't get a publisher, I'll eventually become successful at it. And you're saying this is what's most important to as the foundation of education of a child, is that specific thing?
Yes, and in my book Mastery, I have interviews. I have stories of people that I interviewed who I consider to be masters. And one of the stories I have in there is a man named Cesar Rodriguez, who is the last jet fighter pilot in the United States to be decorated as I forget what the word is, the word for an ace, I think it is. He shot down like 3 or 4 other planes during the first Gulf War in 91, 92. And I interviewed him because there's nothing more difficult skill-wise than flying a jet fighter plane. The time, your life is on the line, how nerve-wracking it is. And he told me that he's this kind of short Hispanic guy, 5'8", lives in Arizona. He said he wanted to be a fighter pilot, and he went to fighter pilot school like in Alabama somewhere. And all the other guys were like what we would call golden boys. They looked like Tom Cruise. They acted like Tom Cruise. And they were going to be the best fighter pilots. And he, in the beginning, scored terribly. He was one of the worst. In a group of 100, he was like maybe the 3rd worst. And they were all on the top. And he goes, damn it, I don't think I can do this. And then he thought back to when he was younger. He loved football, and he played a lot of football, even though he was kind of short. And he ended up being the quarterback of his team in high school, even though he's only like 5'8". They played like a wishbone, but he still could pass pretty well. And he said, I went back to my time in sports, and because we're talking about when he's like 25 or 26 in jet fighter school, maybe a little younger. I thought back, when I was 12, 13, I learned that by lifting weights, I could get myself stronger than all these other people who were much bigger than I was. I learned that by practicing passing day in and day out, I could develop my arm really well. And then by believing in myself and convincing the coach that I was smart enough to run a complicated offense. In other words, it built confidence in him so that he could go back to that when he was in school as a jet fighter pilot, and he could build on that. And what he did as a kind of parallel was he spent 100 times more on the simulators than anybody else. He just said, I'm going to get over all of my fears by sheer repetition. Just like I lifted weights, I'm going to go on that simulator 100 hours a week, and I'm going to master this thing. And it worked, and he ended up graduating like the top 2 of his school and became the last decorated jet fighter pilot in the Air Force, because he could draw upon that experience. Football has nothing to do with being a fighter pilot. So if your young daughter studies dance and later she decides to become work at an MBA and go on Wall Street, she at least learned the value that becoming good at ballet, there's a reward for being disciplined. There's a reward there. It doesn't have to be exactly what the person pursues, as I mentioned, but just laying down that pattern, that being disciplined, that learning something gives you confidence. And I titled the story of that fighter pilot, Trust the Process. So if when you're young, you learn that the process will reap you rewards, you can trust it and you can apply it to anything as you get older. If you suddenly, and you're 40 years old and you want to learn how to play the piano, you know that you did something earlier when you were younger. You know that the process will work, and you'll do it. You'll do whatever it is that you need because you trust that discipline and repetition will build true skill.
Wow, that is so interesting. That's very fascinating. It's like the most profound thing ever, but it's such an easy to understand thing that it's a big aha moment. And that's interesting that he had the exact same thing kind of thought process that I had. That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So do you think that's what's missing most in our culture? And I know you're a busy guy, but I guess this is a nice way to kind of go full circle. Do you think at the core, this is kind of one of the most, when you look around, I read some stats like this was before the economic shutdown, so it's probably a lot worse now, but it was like 75% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. Then there was that Gallup poll that said like 80% of people are actively disengaged from their jobs, politically correct way to say I hate this thing. And then they say 9 out of 10 people die with less than $10,000 and virtually no financial assets. Almost nobody's prepared for retirement, like all these things. It's like we really have a culture all around. We're very unhealthy as a culture. Like we're kind of in the fail in every department overall. And do you think at the core it's that we don't know how to stick something through, either because we didn't develop that habit or we were conditioned at an early age to not think for ourselves, so we never find those things, so we get pulled in the direction of society, and then if we find something, we don't have the emotional and mental strength or the neurological connections built to succeed at something. So it kind of comes down to like those two things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So, look at, we're both Americans. Look at what our ancestors were like. I read a lot about the 19th century, the kind of pioneer spirit that Americans had, and the kind of what happened after the Civil War and the explosion of all of the kind of robber barons, what was going on in business, etc. People were incredibly energetic, were incredibly tough-minded. They would, have an idea for it and they would build whatever it was. They built this country and made it what it was. And I think of my father's generation and World War II and the incredible sacrifices people had to go through during the war. He would tell me about it. He served in the Navy. People are whining and bitching about the lockdown and not being able to go to a bar or a tanning salon now. People in World War II had to do with 1,000 times worse. We have gotten so soft inwardly that if you compare ourselves to generations in the past, and I'm not trying to rag on millennials, because I think millennials have a lot of great things that are much superior to my generation. I'm kind of caught in between the boomer and Generation X. There's a lot of things that are better about millennials, but there is a softness that people have where they're not able to deal with any kind of criticism or failure or challenge. And they just kind of melt if people saying they get whine and they complain and they want to talk about this injustice or whatever. They're not able to stick up for themselves. And this applies, to everybody, even people who don't have much power in the world traditionally. You need to build inner strength, inner resources, the ability to withstand, because life is hard, it's tough, it's never easy. And if you grow up with the idea because of your phone or because your parents are coddling you, and then you're 21, 22, and you're thrown out into the real world, and you think everything should be easy and everything should come to you, and you're so privileged in that sense of entitled, you're in for an incredible root shock. You haven't built any of those inner resources. You're just going to melt the first time someone criticizes you, the first time you're fired. I've been fired. I've been told when I was 25 years old, when I was in a meeting with an editor at a magazine, this guy, after he had his second martini, my boss, he said, "Robert, you are not a good writer. You're never going to be a writer. Just forget about it. Go to business school or law school. Give it up. You're not disciplined," etc. I've been criticized. I have failed at many things in my life. And sure, it affected me and it just got me depressed. But I picked myself back up again and I kept trying. I never gave up. Well, a lot of people lack that kind of inner confidence, that inner strength. And it is a cultural thing. It is something that we're going through. And if you compare where we were as Americans just 80 years ago, you don't have to go back that far, it was a very different situation. Things shifted a lot in the 60s, where a kind of a youth culture developed, where people have started to get this idea that everything needs to be fun and easy and pleasurable. If I'm not having fun, I don't want to do it, kind of whiny attitude. I think that's really when things started to break down. But I'm very worried about it, and I think you kind of hit your head on it. It's a cultural phenomenon. I really shouldn't be hard on people. I don't mean to be, because I understand why they're that way. If my parents had coddled me and told me, "Robert, everything you do is wonderful. You're such a lovely boy. Everything you're going to do great because you're just who you are and we love you," I probably wouldn't have developed the kind of attitude that I have, which is I'm not lovely. I'm not good. I actually need to work at it myself to get better constantly. But if I'd been coddled, if I'd been told that if I had a smartphone in my hand, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't have had the inner resources. So I don't mean to blame people so much, but even if it's a cultural phenomenon, you as an individual can take yourself out of that matrix and try and develop yourself in a way that's not inundated by this culture. You can develop your own inner strength. Just as you develop your physical strength, you lift weights, etc., you can develop your own inner strength.
Yeah, it's well said. And you're not being hard, you're being honest. And this type of psychology is what, in my opinion, pushing especially younger people towards socialism. And I think that that's scary to me. But I think when you come back around to this concept, I look at it and I think about some of my friends and people I know with kids. I notice a common thread, just to kind of wrap up. And I feel like a lot of it comes from, obviously, one is, playing video games all day, being on our phones all day. That's a given. Everyone knows that. And then the other phase of that is, I feel like there's as parents, dating all the way back to older generation, I can remember some of my friends were like that. When I was a kid, their parents were like that. They let their kids quit at everything once they get uncomfortable with it. They play soccer for a while and then they let them stop when the kid is tired and they had 2-a-days and they had their first time doing 2-a-days and like, this is hard. And I remember that a lot with basketball. There was a a lot of kids that were good, but then once we got into high school, then you start having 2-a-days, and then you've got to lift in between both practices, and you have to be there each time. Everyone just starts dropping off. And it happens earlier too, where like you have a 7-year-old girl and she wants to learn guitar or chess or sing, and she's not very good, and it takes her longer than she thinks. So she goes to the next thing, and she goes to the next thing, and she goes to the next thing. And whereas once you're saying in like, when that happens, that's when you step in and you can help them stick to a decision and the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fine balance between it. So they chose to, let's say your daughter chooses to learn ballet because she really is excited by dance. And then she starts going through it, and then she starts tuning out after about a couple months. She goes, I don't want to do this anymore. And you kind of ask her why. And if it's because she says, I don't really think I like ballet anymore, and you discern that she's being honest as opposed to lying about it, then okay, well, what is it that you discover that you really want to do? All right, so she names something else. You go, all right, well, we're going to do that now. And then if the same thing happens again, now you know you've got a problem here, and now you've got to put your foot down. So you have to be able to tell the difference between somebody who honestly discovers that it wasn't something that was really right for them, as opposed to somebody who can't stick to anything. And then you have to be a parent. Being a parent isn't just coddling and saying, oh, Jada, you'll be good at whatever you do. We're all great. The world is competitive. There are winners and losers. There are grades. There are, income. People have different incomes. It's not all easy and equal and fair, right? Life isn't fair. So you as a parent have to be able to make that clear to them. Mm-hmm. So if they choose something and they start whining about it, if you discern that they're actually just doing that because they don't have the discipline, then you go, sorry, I'm going to make you keep going to that. And I'm going to get you to that point where you start loving it. You can do that. Parents do need to be tough in that sense. But, part of the culture now is nothing should be competitive. Everybody should get a good grade. Everybody should get an A. There should be no awards out there. There should never be a first place for this, that, or the other. Everybody should get an award and a hug. No, damn it. Not everybody should get an award and a hug. People who win, you have to learn that you have to be able to be tough, and that winning at something is actually a valuable thing. It's actually good to have a sense of excellence, to be competitive. A competitive spirit is great. To be ambitious is great. And if you're going to absorb the cultural prejudices against ambition and against competition, you're never going to get very far in life, because you're going to be constantly waiting for people to bail you out. So, yeah, sorry.
It's amazing, and I'm just trying to be respectful of your time. I see that a lot with adults too. We've talked about this from a macro of like a social parents versus child type of thing, but I see that a lot with 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds, especially being in the personal development space and being on YouTube, and they end up, they start something and then it doesn't happen as quickly as they want, and they say, I guess it's not meant to be, or they think God is somehow giving them a sign that they should do something else, and then they just kind of go to the next one, hot potato, hot potato, hot potato. So I was thinking, and I could go for 10 hours with you. I want to be super respectful of your time. I was thinking, what do you think about this in conclusion? Like, I like to kind of find some way to have a practical, everything you said is obviously super practical, logical. It should be incredible value, but a specific, like a leaving and doing thing. And I was thinking, one of the problems also why we never get to that point of making a decision as an adult is almost because we're afraid of failure. So it's like an unconscious protective mechanism. So we never decide. What do you think about proposing to everyone in conclusion, to whether it's a big thing, it's an idea or a business or a new invention they've always wanted to do and they haven't done it, or it's a small thing like they've been saying they want to lose the 10 pounds they put on during quarantine. We make we invite everyone to pick one thing and make a firm decision and see it through on a micro level of what you've been discussing is this amazing theme, to develop that habit of seeing a success through, big or small, that we make a decision. What do you think about that? Would that be a fun way to, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very important because the main thing you have to learn to know about the brain is you learn most by the mistakes that you make. So if I'm writing a book, naturally I think that everything I'm writing is really, really great, right? But then I have somebody look at it and they go, "Oh, Robert, I don't understand this idea. What are you saying there?" By their criticism, I suddenly learn something. I improve myself. I get feedback from people. You know, it's your mistakes that you make that teach you. It's your failures that teach you. If you don't allow yourself to fail, you will never ever learn anything in life. So I always come back to the story of entrepreneurs like Henry Ford, who was probably the greatest entrepreneur in American history. He had the idea in the 1890s to start an automobile um, manufacturing company, and he started it up, and it takes huge amounts of capital to start something like that up. And he got an investor, and it failed. It failed after a year. It was a disaster. And everybody said, well, that's it for Henry Ford, because you never get a second chance in the automobile industry. But he wouldn't let that bother him. He learned from his failure that what went wrong. So he got a second investor involved because he was very persuasive or whatever. We found somebody crazy enough. He did it again, and he failed a second time. People were laughing. I said, "Get out of here, Mr. Ford. You'll never succeed." He did it a third time. He failed a third time. Finally, in all the times he learned how to make the most perfect factory. He learned how to create the factory system that ended up revolutionizing the world. And then the fourth time, I don't know if it was the third or the fourth time, don't quote me on that, he created Ford Automobile Company, one of the greatest success stories in American history. And he said later, it was only by failing that I learned. So you have much more to lose in life by not trying, because by not trying, you're never going to learn anything, right? You want to fail, you want to be criticized, you want to make mistakes, because that is precisely what will teach you. And so you can do that tomorrow. If you're putting off learning something that you've always wanted to learn, doing something in which you're afraid, overcome that fear by telling yourself, I'm 35 years old, and the worst thing in life is to be 55 and to have never tried anything and to suddenly be facing death and retirement in 10, 20 years and to have wasted all of your potential. That's what's facing you. It's just that you're not dealing with reality. You think that you're going to live forever, that you're always going to be healthy, that money will be there. No. Okay, so think, I better do it now. This is the best time because we're living in an environment where everything has been devastated. Businesses are cratering left, right, and center. Now is the time to be plotting your new business, your new idea, because there's going to be people are going to want things. Industries are going to change. Just to give one idea, I think that in the entertainment world or in the travel industry, people now are going to be oriented because they've been locked up and they've been bored to hell. They're going to want to have experiences. And that's going to be the new future of the service industry, giving people not just going to a gym, but giving them an experience at the gym where it's like this environment that they're immersed in. These are the places, these points of opportunity that are going to be out there in the landscape. Go ahead and do it now and don't wait for 5 or 10 years, because in 5 or 10 years you might be dead or things will be a lot worse than they are now. Learn how to fail, learn from your mistakes. It's the best way to toughen yourself up, and it's the best education in the world. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
That was you answered it better than I could ask it. How about that?
Okay.
I thought that was a great way to end. This is the first interview I'm going to end when I finish, and I'm going to listen to it back right after. I mean, It's so great what you said, and I want to make sure I really grasp everything you're saying. It's amazing. It was a spectacular interview. Anything? I mean, I know your books sell themselves, but anything, if you want to let anyone know, new book coming out, or you want any place particularly you'd prefer people buy your book from, you like or anything else?
Well, I'm trying to promote my last book, which is selling very well, but I'm always promoting. It's The Laws of Human Nature. You can find that on Amazon very easily. I have a website called Power, Seduction, and War. The and is spelled out. PowerSeductionAndWar.com. Those are my first 3 books. And in that, you'll find links to all of my blogs, to my podcasts, and to my other 3 books. The one I wrote with 50 Cent called The 50th Law, Mastery and the Laws of Human Nature, as well as links to my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and all that stuff.